Hey, welcome to Relatable, Relationships Unfiltered. Sometimes we feel like dating should just come naturally, but we really all do need a little help. And joining me today is Bree Jenkins, psychotherapist and dating coach. And I am super excited for this episode because she's going to be giving us her top tips from the dating playbook. This is Relatable, Relationships Unfiltered. Bree, thank you so much for joining me. I love your content. We met on Instagram, and I am so excited to have you here.
I am so excited to be here. I love your content as well. And I love talking about the juicy realm of dating. It's just full of like all the best stuff.
It absolutely is, especially when the person across from you is a complete shit show when it comes to dating. I will give you tons of material to be able to dissect and help with. So I appreciate that. So that's a lot of the work that, I do as a relationship and intimacy expert I help a lot of my clients with that dating process. And, they say those who can't do teach or something like that. So I have all of those, tips and tools and everything like that. It is definitely different when we implement it for ourselves. How did you get started as a dating coach?
Yeah, my origin story as a dating coach is kind of interesting. My first client was actually my sister. So after I had graduated from my master's program in therapy and like clinical psychology, marriage, family therapy, me and my sister were both looking for jobs, and I went home to New Orleans and I was like, sis, let me help you with your love life. I'll get us like the best dates this whole summertime. And she was kind of like super smart. She went to Stanford when she was like 16. So she really didn't have like the traditional dating history or skills. And so I helped her out and she met her husband. And she met her husband and they've been together like, I think 12 years now, 2 kids, dog, all the things. And then I helped a friend of hers out and a third friend. And I was like, you know what? This is kind of a skill that's a little bit outside of my school training skill sets. And so ever since then, I have been in the business of helping people find love.
I love that. That is great. And so cool when you recognize that you kind of have the niche, that special gift. Where do you think that your approach kind of differs when it comes to being a dating coach? And then I know you kind of part of, even on your bio, you talk about how do you word it, that it's dating like basically to get the ring is kind of how what's your
I'm the dating coach with the diamond touch is what I say.
Wow.
So in terms of like, I think just because so many of my first clients wind up getting married, I realized, I'm really great at the space of people who want to date super intentionally with the goal of like a really healthy long-term relationship or marriage. And so I combined a lot of different elements. Obviously, like I'll never fully abandon my therapeutic background. It's just too valuable of, psychological nuggets and whatnot. But I think the practical pieces of like, how do we show up when we're on the dating market, and how do we flirt, and what's the feminine energy piece, and like how do you use communication to get the things that you want out of partners and have that land differently. I think all of those pieces wind up combining for people to have like the long-term relationship and marriage.
Yes. Yeah, no, great points. And I think that the biggest barrier, which is definitely my biggest barrier, is not making time for it. So not, putting myself out there, not carving out the Friday or Saturday night so I can spend my time doing that. And I know a lot of my clients, that's what they struggle with as well. And the accountability piece goes a long way, to have someone you're checking in with every week to, what efforts are you putting towards this? How are you actually putting action towards it? Because I completely agree. My role as a therapist is my passion. I absolutely love that. But there is something just different and fun about the coaching aspect of it's a different world and different conversations. So I agree that I enjoyed both because of that. when you are starting working with somebody and you're like,
Mm-hmm.
okay, first thing, we got to get exposure. We've got to, find out what your options are. Where do you start with that? Do you use or suggest they use the dating apps? Suggest to go local and organically? Where do you start?
So I am team well-rounded dating plan. Like I think something like 40% of couples start online now. And I just tell people, you don't want to leave 40% chance on the table.
Yeah.
It's kind of like saying you want a job, but you only want to network for that job and you don't want to do any searches or look what's already published out there. That's just not a good plan, So I always encourage people to do both. For some people, it's just much more comfortable to be in person. And I totally get that. And I think the best dating plans is combining both elements. So I never tell people to abandon their networks or mixers or, going out to lounges, bars, clubs, hotels, whatever your favorite kind of places are to find the best catches. I absolutely love pounding the pavement. I actually met my husband in person in Los Angeles. And it was kind of intentional because I would partner with girlfriends and we would have ladies' fun night. And the goal was we're going to go out, we're going to go to a new place, we're going to wear our cute stuff, we're going to have fun no matter what, but we're going to break off into teams of two and try to meet like nice, eligible guys at these places. So there was kind of intention behind it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the combination of using the online resource to meet new people that you normally wouldn't meet, thinking about when you go out, having that intention of like, let's show up to places we've never been, to parts of the city that we don't normally go to, it winds up giving you the most amount of opportunity. So I never tell people to abandon ship with online because I have so many clients that have their spouses from online dating.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I would agree that the more options people have, definitely the better. My kind of
Mm-hmm.
epiphany lately with the dating apps is I was like, I wonder if I don't have, well, there's a few reasons I don't have luck on there, but partly I think I'm like, I wonder if the type of man I would be interested in wouldn't use a dating app. And so that has
Mm.
been kind of like on my mind, just as I'm looking at some of these photos of like the way that maybe like I'm very sensitive with this, the way that
I
people
know
are
the
like,
photos you're talking about.
yeah, the way they're posing or like what they're, and I'm like, yeah, I don't think I would date somebody who's like posing everywhere with their shirt off or, various things I could go down the list and I will not. But so I'm like, I just don't, but then the other people who are kind of more shy, then it's
Mm-hmm.
hard to get a feel for like who they are.
Yeah.
So that's been my
Yeah.
dilemma. What are your thoughts on that?
I mean, I really encourage a very gentle approach around dating, especially if you're dating like pretty like cis straight men. So here's the thing. The online profile game is like the Wild West. No one got handed a manual of like, this is how you do a great profile. Like there's all these things on how to do a resume. And I don't know if you've ever checked people's resumes, but people are not reading that either because the resumes are crazy too. Right? And that's why sometimes people are like, I've been sending it out and no one calls me. It's like, your resume is terrible.
Yeah.
And it doesn't mean that they're a bad employee or that they don't have skills. It's like they don't know how to market themselves. And so when we're online dating, it's really essentially you need to know how to market yourself. If you go to Instagram and you look at people's profiles, people don't have businesses. Most people don't know how to market themselves. So that's what you're like encountering when you're online is, and I check these profiles all the time of my clients who are daters. And I have been like, why? What would make you pick this picture? And they're like, I thought it made me look funny. And I'm like, no, you're like so much more, polished and sophisticated and beautiful or whatever the adjectives are that are the things that people are looking for than the picture sometimes people choose for themselves. So I really try to encourage my daters, like, like if it's a 5 or above, just swipe yes. And all it is a door. It's an opportunity for the person to show up differently than maybe the picture presents.
Yeah.
Of course, if it's ridiculous, no. But sometimes it's like it's on the cusp where you're like not totally turned off, but nothing about it is telling you that this is your person. Why don't you just create the opportunity to be surprised, right? There's not, it's low stakes. just like maybe this person will surprise me, because certainly my sister's husband definitely had one of the worst profile pictures. It was like in his car with like the camera angle up his nose. It was the
Yes.
only picture that he had. But he's like such a lovely guy, so much more attractive than the picture that he put out there. And I literally told him, no, 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 save him. Like maybe he'll be nice.
Yeah. Yeah. So she met him then on the app.
Yeah.
Okay.
She met
Yeah.
him on the app.
And he only had one photo. And
One
like,
photo.
okay, see, so that's interesting because with my clients, I am often like, if somebody only has one photo, like, we're not really going to spend much time there. So I just feel like the amount of people that are on there would be so, like, there's got to be some barriers in place, some kind of like guidelines of what we're not going to engage with. What are your guidelines when it comes to that?
Yeah, I think, what are you not going to engage with? Anything that seriously brings any of you, raises your hackles, right? You know how sometimes people have like the really like creepy dark picture that maybe they're not like super stable by, right?
Yep.
Anything that's super offensive by, anything that seems wildly inappropriate by, if it's absolutely, again, a turn off by. But if it's just, this is kind of like not giving me the sparkles, right? It's just a person who just put a profile up, but there's nothing offending you, then
Yeah.
you can just say maybe, and then that person, the onus is on them to like send you a message that impresses you. And my sister's husband did send her a message that impressed her. He
Yes.
sent her a complete sentence that was,
Yes.
grammatically correct and
That is effing
interest
impressive.
in her. Exactly.
Yeah.
And like showed interest and chatted, and then said, I'd love to call you and take you out to dinner. So like pleasantly surprised. So I always tell people, like, everything doesn't have to hinge on those pictures and words. It's um just not the most practical. Most people really just don't know how to market themselves. And I've worked with lovely people that are introverts, or they're very stable, they barely have social media, they're like the salt of the earth type of people, and they have some of the worst profiles, but they're great catches in terms of partnership.
Right. Right. And so that leads to my other difficulty with dating apps is that I am way more attracted to energy, to a vibe, to conversation, definitely sapiosexual. So turn
Mm-hmm.
intellectually and, demonstrate your emotional intelligence, all of that. And so when you're looking through pictures, you're not picking up on that for sure. But I love what you're saying about then allow them to start a conversation, because that is something I definitely suggest for my clients as well. Like to give them the opportunity to say something that might be intriguing,
Mm-hmm.
where the conversation goes. And a lot of those red flags, so to speak, can come up pretty quickly as well. Because when they're giving
Yep.
one word answers, when they're not asking any questions, that's pretty
Mm-hmm.
telling what you're dealing with.
Absolutely. It's telling, it's low effort, like it's lacks intention. It's pretty boring. It's
Yeah.
also why I try to tell people, like, when you do make a connection online, try not to stay in the app too long, just because the app is lacking in so many of the physical information that we get when we're standing in front of somebody. Like, the first probably 2 minutes of standing in front of somebody being like, hi, what's your name? Oh, my name is Bree. All of that feels stimulating because I'm looking at you and maybe I can smell your cologne and I'm like, this person's tall and all the things. But
Right.
online, it's just stagnant, so much of the experience that we're looking for is from like our evolutionary perspective of wanting to immediately feel chemistry. But when you're in the apps, it's like a different game. You're basically reading a resume and trying to build fire from there. So, I encourage people to try to have fun with it. Try to see if the person sends you something a little bit stimulating, but like don't stay on the text game too long, because it's going to, 9 times out of 10, is going to shrivel up and die.
Yeah, for sure. And that is definitely something I suggest often as well, because
Mm-hmm.
the back and forth, I agree. When you don't really know who you're flirting with, you don't really know
Mm-hmm.
what the energy is, like it's not going to create a whole lot for you. So let's say we then move. So whether, regardless of how they meet them, out and about or on the app, and we move to the first date, what are some do's and don'ts for that first date? I would love to talk through this. Yeah, because this is where I see in so what you were describing earlier of like your client showing you the picture and you're like, like why? When I have conversations with some of my clients about the first dates and I'm like, why? Like, where do you start with your do's and don'ts?
So I'm very hands-on. I make my daters pick out their first 3 outfits so that they're just on repeat. Because I don't want you to show up anxious, trying, the day of trying to figure out what you're going to wear, because that like builds anxiety. And, sometimes, especially as a woman, you're like, oh, I don't like what I'm wearing. And like, just like the wrong energy to start things off with. So I'm like, pick out the outfits, know that you look good in them. It's seamless. You don't have to think about it. Try not to do super extended dates. Like sometimes people do a little too much that first date,
Agreed.
like 4, 6, 8 hours, like you're drinking the whole time. It's going to be too intimate. It's going to be awkward at some point. It's just way too much. Keep it short. Like a 2-hour date is great. Some people really hate the coffee dates, and I get it. Like I was not a coffee date girl. I would always do like a very gentle pivot of like, oh, I'm not really much of a coffee girl, but I'm totally down for like drinks and bites. That would be my go-to. And the majority of men would be like, oh, okay, cool. If somebody ever offered me drinks, I would just be like, oh, drinks and bites sound great, but I'm a lightweight, so I've got to have something. Otherwise, it's going to get crazy. Or I would say something kind of cute, and then they'd be like, oh, sure. So I think you should always angle for the type of date that you want, so that you're most comfortable. Because when you're comfortable, it's much easier to be in your feminine energy. And when you're in your feminine energy, you can flirt, So it's like, if you're all anxious and annoyed before you even get there, like it's really hard for the date to flow the way that it needs to flow. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's so true because anxiety is at the root of irritability. So when we are anxious, it does manifest as annoyance or just maybe being more standoffish, not being as friendly or free flowing. So I'd agree. And I love what you're talking about in terms of the length of the first date. That is so important. And I went on a date a few months ago and the first couple hours, like we had sushi, we had drinks and stuff like that. And it was so much fun. And I was interested and I was intrigued. And then he follows it up by asking to go like get something after. And I'm like, okay. And so like we went to get another drink after. And I'm like, okay, now we're going on hour 3, like 3.5. And I'm like, now I'm bored by you, by the way.
Yep.
Like we would have just been done at like the 2-hour mark. I probably would have gone to the second date. But because it was dragged out in that way, I'm like, yo, ADHD dater over here is not trying to hang out for 3 or 4 hours.
Yes, it is. I'm ADHD too. So it's like exactly like I'm going to get distracted, or sometimes your social battery runs out, or a lot of times we date after work, right? And we're not keeping track of like, it's been such a long day and so much has happened and I'm tired and this is normally my bedtime or whatever. And you can kind of just skip over all of that if you stay in the guide rails, which is what I tell my daters, like, the rails are there to keep you safe. So it's just like do them. And of course, as you get to know someone, you like someone, like you can build the type of relationship that you truly want. But like those first dates, try to stay in those like easy rules. Same thing with like drink limits. I'm big into like, try not to drink more than 2 drinks on the date, just because like as alcohol comes into play, the inhibitions get lower and like the jokes start flying and there's just so much more room and opportunity to make a faux pas.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. So being aware of the time limit, being aware of number of drinks, I think that those type of boundaries are also really fantastic to have in place, because if you identify those, you set those, the way that that person receives those or back on them is so telling of how to move forward with that. Because if they can't receive the boundary, which we've all been there, so annoying. That is one of the biggest icks. Like
it is.
No, just a little longer, or whatever the case.
Like we're bargaining already on the first date.
Right. And then it's like, okay, so that's very telling. Like if they have no problem doing that the first time you're hanging out, that is a glimpse into the future if you, continue that. So
1000%. I always tell people, like, if something makes you really uncomfortable, go ahead and say like, oh, this, it make me really comfortable if blah, 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 blah. And if that person responds in a nasty way, that is giving you so much red flag energy that you need to get on out of there.
yeah,
It's true. Like, because people show up on first date trying to be the best version of themselves, the most considerate version of themselves. So if already
yeah,
they're willing to risk being like a jerk,
right. Which they might not
where
as being a jerk, right? Which is the even bigger concern.
because it like, oh, so like you even lack self-perspective of how this is
Yes.
coming across.
Right. Yeah. That's very important. So let's talk about flirting because really interesting that
Mhm.
a lot of people struggle with flirting. Like they
Absolutely.
they don't know how to, they don't really know what it
Mhm.
looks like, or they just feel really uncomfortable trying to do it. And I have
Mhm.
so much empathy for that because that would be like you kind of want to build that chemistry, you want to gauge the interest, but you're like, I don't know how. So let's
Yes.
talk about like what are some things that you might suggest when it comes to also let's put some I guess like even guidelines around what flirting is and what flirting isn't.
Yeah.
Because I think sometimes when people don't know how to, then they just don't do it at all. And sometimes they
Yeah.
don't know how to and they take it to like a really immature, juvenile place.
Yeah.
Which is also a complete turn off.
Yes, the immature juvenile place is where we do not want to land.
It is
Um,
not sexy, my friends.
the way that I like to think about flirting, or at least the way that I like teach a lot of my daters, is fun, fun, kind of frisky, light energy.
Yeah.
Not super sexual, not super aggressive, right? It's just fun and playful and maybe a little mysterious or maybe a little, come here. Do you want to
Yeah.
come
Wait.
here? Like
Mhm.
just a little coy. A soft hand with the flirt is much better than a heavy hand.
Yeah.
Um, and I always talk, I do like an assessment where we talk about like, what is your intuitive flirt style? Like I have these names that I'm like, are you a friendly flirter? Are you like a vixen flirter? Like, are you like Jennifer Aniston? Are you like Angelina Jolie? Both
Mm,
are great. They both are able to get the same hot guy, but like you just need to know
good
which
point.
one is easier for you to kind of lean into.
Right.
But I think for a lot of people, what I find is getting them to be more of a friendly flirter is the easiest one because we all have a lot of social programming of what it's like to be friendly.
Mhm.
And it's just like kicking the friendly up just a little bit, maybe touching the person very lightly on like the green areas, right? Like the shoulder, the arm, the maybe yellow area, the thigh, right? Touching the hair, lots of eye contact, laughing easily. All of these are like classic flirting techniques that actually work. But you do have to practice it. And what I find is like sometimes the biggest piece for people is about getting in that right energy, which is why I spend so much time talking about when you get to that date, trying to be relaxed and trying to think of it as like, you know what, we're going to have fun no matter what because I'm here. There's food and drinks that's about to appear. And, I'm curious, you're another person. We're just going to have fun no matter what. And when you get into that mindset, it is a lot easier to flirt.
Yes. Yeah. And I think that really for that first date, going into it with that mindset that there's no expectations here. Like we don't have to be future spouse. There doesn't have to be a commitment. Just have fun in that first one. And
Mm-hmm.
that is really important. But I know that that's one of my barriers because I'm like, with how busy I am and what I'm just constantly, which I get everyone is busy, but like take it to another level. And so with that, I'm like, okay, well, if I'm not going to marry this person, which by the way, I would never get married again anyway, but if I'm not going to have a long-term commitment with this person, why am I even going out to drinks with them? And that's the mindset that
So it's like very all or none.
yes. And I've got to like, that is definitely going into the new year. I am setting some intentions for this. But that is one of them. It's like, just go have fun. Because I do have a couple guy friends that I won't be serious with, but we do hang out and we, you know, go on date-ish type things that we know it's not like I don't have interest in going further. But we have a lot of fun when we do that. And so I try to have that mindset that like you can just go hang out and have fun.
Exactly. But you can just go out and have fun. And honestly, when you turn it super low stakes of like, we're here, we're going to have fun. Like, let's just talk and laugh. And I'm going to practice my flirting skills so that when I do get to the good one, you know, to the one, right, I'm like a top flirter. I think it honestly makes it so much easier. And you wind up increasing your chance of meeting the person without having to be online. So that's like the other carrot I dangle in people's face. Like, the better you get at flirting, the more likely it is that you'll be able to meet your person in person, just because you have the right, you know, you're putting out the right vibes and energy to like pull that person to you.
Yeah. How do you suggest for people to practice their flirting? So like, are you saying just in real time, or do you have them even by themselves? Is there, you know, with a mirror or something like that, they're watching their own body language? How do you help with that?
Well, when people like enroll in my course or they do one-to-one work with me, we'll have like a flirting session where we'll practice and I'll give them like feedback on like their body and stuff. And I also drop into flirting just to show people what it's like. Like if I'm talking now and then I'm like, so I know that you are very interested in talking to me more. People are like, oh, snap. Like she turned it on. I'm like, yep, you can turn it on, you can turn it off. So people can see that it really is just a skill that you have to have to access. And then like, like practice. I tell people practice on everyone, practice on babies, on dogs, on old people, on people that you're not attracted to because the stakes are really low there. And it starts to become fun because you'll recognize that like flirting really is just a type of like high vibrational energy. And people respond to it even when there is no romantic attachment. Like you can flirt with the store clerk and they'll be like, have a great day. You know, they'll be really happy and there's nothing there, but now you're better at that skill.
Yes. Yeah. And one of the pieces of homework I just gave a client recently is just even to start conversation. You know, I gave him X number of people for that week, but just to start conversation. So when he's out and about, practice striking up a conversation, no matter how random it is, no matter who it's with. But when you can hone that skill, when you can, and you and I as therapists and coaches in that way, like we could talk to literally anyone, anywhere. And it's such a skill because when it lowers awkward situations, like lowers the frequency of awkward situations. We don't feel blindsided or caught off guard when we're, you know, forced to strike up a conversation. It's a really beneficial thing. And so when you think about translating that to dating, and sometimes maybe the awkward lull comes in on that first date or the first couple dates, for you to be able to know how to then pivot it and transition this thing is, it's a really good skill to have.
It is. And I think the more you can have fun on these dates, regardless of the outcome, the easier it is to keep making space for dating.
Yeah. Yeah. So then when we found our person, we went on a couple well, I guess first, before we go on a couple dates, let's talk through how do we decide if we even want a second date? Like, do you encourage that you give everyone X number of dates, or are there flags? Like what strategies do you use for that?
Well, okay. So this is where it gets tricky because like when I work with people, it's always about breaking whatever the pattern is. So if you go out on all the second dates, no matter what, then I want you to start being more in tune with like, you already know. So listen to it, right? Don't do it. But for most people, what I find most people are not going out on all the second dates. They're not the like permissive ones. They're usually more like, no one is working no matter what, or I just didn't have enough butterflies, or just wasn't off the charts. So I don't want to do it again. Those are the people that I'm like, if nothing blew up, right? Again, nothing crazy happened. There were no obvious deal breakers, and it was just a straight date and it was cool. Like I kind of like them, you know, go out on the second one because sometimes on the first date, one or both of you all are in your head or a little nervous. And as long as you have progression from date to date, then it's like a green light to the next,
Good. Good.
spot.
Yeah, the
Yeah.
more comfortable you feel with each other, and then it allows conversation to go to different places. And yeah, because often that first and even the first couple, you are trying to show up as your best self, which is just natural, but that also might prohibit or inhibit you from showing certain sides of your personality or talking about topics that aren't going to come up at the first date. So yes, that makes sense. And then even moving that into like commitment, how do you transition there? And which obviously it's different for everybody, but I know that that's for a lot of my clients, they talk about, they kind of get in the limbo stage. Maybe they've gone on like a handful of dates and they like them, but they're trying to like feel out the vibe on both sides.
Yeah.
How do you move through that?
Less vibing and more strategic conversation at the right space of dating, right? So if you are very sure that you want a like serious relationship, or you want something that leads to a relationship or leads to marriage, you do need to say it. I don't like heavy conversations on the first date per se. However, asking someone like, oh, so what are you looking for that's not an off limit topic point. And certainly for a lot of people who are dating like in their late 20s through their 30s and 40s, why the hell can't you say, what are you looking for? We are too old for these games, you know? And if anybody is like, oh, the noose on my neck or whatever, that is a sign that they are playing games and probably a commitment phobe or whatever, right? And you should take that as a sign of their emotional immaturity. So like, don't be afraid to just say like, oh, what are you looking for? And I always tell people, if someone asks you what you're looking for and your goal is marriage or long-term relationship, you can always say something like, well, right now I'm very focused on finding someone that I have great connection with and spending time with, but ultimately I would love for it to lead to like a healthy relationship, and one day I see myself getting married. So then you have your main focus, but you are not lying or turning marriage or relationship into a dirty word, because like if you can't even say it, how are you going to get it?
Right.
If an employer asks you, what are you looking for? Whatever you got on tap. No, I want benefits. Like I want to make X amount more than my last relationship. And that's what I'm looking for, because it's the only way that you're going to get it. So absolutely say it. And I think a lot of times if people have that conversation earlier, it sets the stage for when you're dating for you to more naturally say like, hey, I just want to have a check-in of like, where is this headed? Because I feel like we're both on the same page of what we ultimately want, but I just want to make sure that like neither of us are really off target.
Right. Which is really important. It can be so hard in those initial conversations. I know a lot of people are kind of tempted to say, whatever you have on tap, basically. They're just like, well, and especially if there is chemistry, which can be so blinding. So be aware of that when I am a proponent of chemistry. I know a lot of relationship experts like really warn against all the chemistry stuff because of what it's bringing up. I talk a lot about, though, that how we are programmed, that is what we are going to seek out. That's not necessarily a bad thing. We just have to be aware of if it is a bad thing, if it is impacting our mental health, our well-being. But having chemistry is not bad, but we can't be blinded by that. So if we're like, holy shit, he's so hot, I don't like, whatever you want, I don't care, like I'm down for anything. Okay, that's what leads to the situationships. It leads to us really being stuck in a limbo state that can go on for months or even years. And so and like you said, at our age, ain't nobody got time for that. So at this point, we've got to be really upfront and intentional with what we're looking for. And it's okay if what you're looking for is not a long-term commitment, that is okay too. But just being upfront about it is what matters.
Yes, exactly. Be upfront, have the conversation, don't avoid the conversation. Sometimes we keep ourselves in a lot of pain by just avoiding a more direct conversation about what our needs are. And again, like you're teaching people how to treat you. So if you don't even honor your own needs by not opening your mouth about what it is you want, who is going to like search out to make sure that you're super satisfied if you can't even say what it is that will make you happy?
Right. Right. And so being aware of your needs, your wants, your boundaries, what you're expecting out of relationships, what you're really needing out of relationships going into it. And so when I work with my clients, and I talk about all this all the time, but the needs are the non-negotiables, the wants are the preferences, and then the boundaries are the deal breakers. And those deal breakers can be hard because especially when you're on the apps and you weed through so many people and then you're like, okay, finally somebody and I just ran into this like a couple weeks ago. I'm like, okay, this is like, he's 6'5", he's a businessman, he's all these things. And then one of my deal breakers. And I'm like, shit. Okay. So I have been burned by this particular deal breaker one too many times. And so I'm like, I just have to be done. You know, I got to move on and not allow that. And so I think that that's so important for people in the dating realm to identify those things and then honor yourself when it comes to those things.
Yeah. I mean, I always do like a deep dive into the deal breakers versus the wants, the compromises, or the needs. Because sometimes I feel like people base their deal breakers off of their trauma points versus their deepest needs of like, if this happens, it will destroy the relationship versus like, oh, I've had this happen before, or this sounds like a headache to me, right? Like sometimes people will be like, I've dated 3 men with kids and I just can't date anyone else with kids. And I'm like, okay, so is it kids or is it high stress, high conflict baby mama situation?
I was just gonna say, the baby mama. I'm gonna tell you that right now. That's exactly
and they're like, oh no, it's the baby mama thing. I'm like, is it primary parents that you date, or would you date someone who has their kids, you know, for 3 weeks in the summer? Or, you know, like once we get into the context of it, they're like, oh, it's actually this key piece. And I'm like, okay, well, great. That's really the deal breaker versus just kind of hacking off the whole arm because you don't like the finger.
Yeah, no, that's a great insight and so true. And so getting clear on all of that. So then let's say you go through the handful of dates, you're feeling good, and then you get the text that they're not feeling the same. Where do we go? I know. You were so excited for where I was going with that. You're like, yes, Liz, is this where we jump into bed? No, this is where they break up with you. How can you help people kind of jump back from that?
You know, if it wasn't in alignment for them, it wasn't in alignment for you. That's just the truth of the matter. And you ultimately have to try to invest in that mindset, even when you're dating, of like a very like abundant mindset and not such a scarcity one. Because sometimes we really lock in on something that we think is for us. But if it's not for us, it's not for us. Sometimes it's not the right time and maybe it'll swing back around. But I think anytime that happens, I usually like talk with daters about like, well, what were the positive nuggets that we can take away from this? Like we can take away that there's somebody who likes us or somebody who had these qualities that we didn't think we would find. And like, it did work for a while, but it just wasn't that right connection point. So sometimes there's like a really powerful piece as to why that was almost in alignment, but not perfectly flush. And so I really try to get people to see that like most of the time it's a good thing because you don't want your time wasted. One of the worst things is when you love someone and they like you, but they keep you around because they're placeholding for when they find what they love. And so sometimes it's actually the universe being very nice to us by not allowing us to stay in a situation where we don't get to experience someone loving us as much as we love them. You know, so I just try to frame it in a way where people can still trust that there's something else out there, but that this is probably actually a gift.
Yeah. Yeah, which feels really hard in the moment when you're being rejected and all of the narratives you create around that and all of your core beliefs that are so triggered and just completely activated because, see, I'm not good enough. I'm not worthy. I'm not lovable. All the things, all the stories we tell ourselves. And you're absolutely right that is the perspective that, no, because you are worthy and because you are lovable and because you are enough, you deserve a partner who feels that way about you. And so if this person is not able to bring that to the table for you or whatever, then that's not your fit. But I love what you're talking about with the abundance mindset. And I ended up I'm big into like manifestation and all of that. And I had 3 clients in a matter of like 2 days bring up this, like it led to this concept of that love really is abundant. And
absolutely.
But we don't look at it that way so often, right? Especially when we have trauma histories and we have these early childhood experiences of not feeling chosen. We tend to think just like hold on to whatever we can get. But there's so much out there.
Yes, there is. And it's kind of like you should cultivate your mindset to always give you messages that there's more love out there. Like I try to minimize any like content that makes me feel like I'm not worthy or, I have to settle for scraps. And I engage in a lot of content that shows me people are getting married every day. People are always finding love, every shape, every size, every country, every year, no matter if there's a pandemic, a war or whatever, it doesn't matter. Love is always happening. Every time I watch a show, doesn't matter if it's a show about extreme lifestyles that most people find undesirable, or if it's a show just about like regular things. There's always a love aspect or people finding someone. So I take all of those little nuggets to just remind me like love is always available. It's evergreen territory. There's millions of people. Everyone wants love. Everyone deserves love. And so it's really just a matter of time before it falls into alignment for you, as long as you believe that can happen. So I'm like always cultivating that voice. And I do a lot of mindset work with my clients about raising that vibration up really high so that even when those things happen, it doesn't trigger that rejection wound as deeply, right? Because it's like, it's not rejection. It's just me moving to the next iteration of the next person I'm supposed to be with.
Yes, I absolutely agree. And I love that. Bree, where can people find you? I so greatly appreciate all your insights today. Where can you be found? Website, social media, all of that.
Yes, all the things at The Gathered Life. You can find me on Instagram at The Gathered Life. You can find me on TikTok, on all of it at The Gathered Life. My website is The Gathered Life. I would love for you all to connect with me, do lots of dating content. I've got all my fashion outfits. Everything is at The Gathered Life. And I have just enjoyed being on the show.
And thank you so much. I have greatly enjoyed having you here. Such fun conversation and such good insights. So thank you again for hanging out.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks again, Bree, for teaching us all how to date a bit better. And thank you all for hanging out on Relatable Relationships Unfiltered. Make sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel, sign up for my newsletter, and find me on Instagram at Dr. Elizabeth Fedrick.
This is Relatable Relationships Unfiltered.